Brieanna, it's so good to have you. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself? Well, we know that you are all about the business administration, but what else? Tell us about you.
Yeah, that sounds good. I grew up with my mom and my sister in Grand Forks. Currently, I'm a part of the MBA association at my school, which allows me to network within my new area of Virginia, which has been nice since I was brand new to the area and didn't really know anybody. It made a huge difference for me.
So with
Yeah.
guests, I get to kind of chat with people a little bit before coming on the show. And Brieanna, you talked a little bit about your experience growing up, but not just growing up, but where you are now, um, feeling like there aren't a whole lot of people that you can identify with or that you can relate to, I guess, given your identity. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I guess growing up, I grew up in a predominantly white area. And then I guess the second most populous thing would be Native Americans, which is also a big population base in North Dakota. So growing up, there really wasn't that many students in my class that looked like me or even in the whole school. So I felt a lot different. And at an early age, I knew I was different just because of some of the comments I heard from other students in the classroom. So like even as early as kindergarten, I remember knowing that I was different in the eyes of most of my classmates. So that was something that I guess was always in the back of my mind starting off at an early age living here and growing up here. I just remember like trying to be friends with some of the people or even inviting someone to my birthday party and then saying comments like, oh, I can't go to your birthday party because you're Black. And that's what I remember her word for word she said to me. So just hearing stuff like that and from somebody that was non-white herself was just kind of, shocking in a way.
Wow.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that is
Yeah. So
interesting.
just a little bit shocking. And then even in kindergarten or at first grade, it happened again with a different student. He said he couldn't be my friend because of my skin tone. So just like stuff like that at such an early age is just very eye-opening because at that age, you don't really understand that until you're, I guess, experiencing it firsthand.
No
I would say.
doubt. I'm really sorry to hear that you experienced something like
Yeah.
that. The first time anyone ever told me they couldn't hang out with me was this guy. I'll never forget this, but I was like 12 or 13, I think. This guy, Scott, so Scott, if you're listening, I don't even know his last name. Scott was cool. We talked for a long time, but then he was from Kentucky. Y'all don't make fun of my Kentucky accent, but he said, my daddy said I can't talk to you anymore. And I was like, what the heck? And that broke my heart because he was fine. Like the kids are fine. It was the parents that were going messing up stuff. And I just was like, oh my gosh. And then the sad part is it happened many, many, many more times, but I was older. So it breaks my heart to hear, especially like in elementary school when birthday parties are happening and kids are really trying to make friends.
Adults come in and ruin everything. I had a similar experience in middle school. So I'm biracial. My mom is Black and my dad is white. And kids were telling me you have to pick one, like a side. And I was, my parents raised me as biracial, so it was like that was a foreign concept to me. And then Ricky, I was trying to date Ricky. I was like,
got her name. Got Ricky.
I remember that. It is like ingrained in my memory. And I remember we were walking home from school one day, and his mom comes outside and was like, "Get over here right now! You cannot talk to one of those girls."
Ooh.
And I was like, "What do you mean one of those girls? I'm an A student. I do really
Right?
well in school."
Excuse you?
And it was when he came next day, he was like, my mom doesn't want me to talk to you because you're a Black girl. And again, that was not part of my understanding of my experience. I was a mixed girl. So that was huge mind blow for me at 12, being like, okay.
I think that this is a very common thing that happens, but people who aren't in the space of multiracial folks or understanding racial ambiguity or any sort of mixed heritage or ethnicity, a lot of people don't get it. I have had so many conversations recently with people who they know, but they've told me they've talked to people who have never heard of the one drop rule or have never heard of the concept of hypodescent. And I was like, how is that possible? But then it occurred to me that maybe that's a conversation that people of color, specifically people with Black or African ancestry, have. but maybe others don't, because I don't ever remember here. Did you have your hypodescent lesson in school? I sure didn't. That was not in my history book.
Absolutely not.
No.
You know, I have plenty to say about this, but I want Brieanna to start because I will derail us.
Well, I wanted to ask, so that's why I'm posing it, because both of you said that, well, actually, Brieanna, I don't think you shared what your racial identity is, but I heard both of you say that the people that said that you couldn't spend time with them anymore was because you were Black. So to me, that was an application of hypodescent, which interestingly today people don't know about. What thoughts do you have about that?
Yeah, I guess that is a good topic. Like, I guess I can share what my cultural background is. My mom is majority white with a small bit of Japanese, and then my father is African American. So growing up, sometimes people didn't know what I was. I've actually been mistaken for Asian, Hispanic, you name it, which I don't really identify with. So I mean, that small bit of Asian, I don't really identify with that. Like, my great-grandmother's from Japan, but, like, when I look in the mirror, I don't feel like I look Asian or any of that kind of thing. So I always didn't understand how people didn't really see me as, like, a mixed person, like, half Black, half white. I didn't understand that how they couldn't see that, because I always could see that in the mirror, but it was just very eye-opening to me. Like you said, some people would consider me just mixed and not Black, but some people would consider me just Black. So that's always been interesting how it's perceived by everybody so differently.
Mm-hmm. And perceived differently than you personally identify.
Yeah.
It's super frustrating because, you know, what comes along with the facets of Blackness, right? Like we talk about colorism and things of that nature, is this fetishization of like biracial Black people. So I identify as a biracial Black person. And so people, usually men, are like, oh, are you Hispanic? Are you Latina? Are you this and the third? Like, my mother is Black. My father is white. There is like very little to romanticize about, you know, my ethnicity. But even in that, it's like, oh, you're biracial, you're mixed, like you got quote unquote good hair. And it's like, here we go again with these layers of ascribed meaning to what people say or assume your races, and you know, having a conversation about the definition between like race, ethnicity, and nationality is also a thing. So I'll have people like, what's your nationality? I'm American. No.
I am American.
That's always,
yeah.
That's always my answer. Whenever they ask you, what are you? I'm American.
Yeah. Well, your nationality, my nationality is American.
Brieanna, can I go back to something else you said? You talked about like growing up and like where you were living and stuff, feeling like there weren't a lot of people that looked like you or were like you. And I know because you're doing all the fancy things with the BAs and the MBAs and all the stuff. Look, I work in corporate America. I mean, right now I work for myself, but I've been in that space, and specifically in the business world, there's been a pretty, I think it's changing, but it also might depend on where you are. I'm in the DC area, so it's pretty diverse here too. Most big cities are. But a lot of times it can be pretty homogenous. And I just wonder, are you seeing the same thing in school? Or what are you, like, what comes to mind for you as you think about your identity and the people you're with and what this could look like as you go out into the workspaces? Or maybe you have already and you can speak to that.
So my experience, like, at University of North Dakota was a lot different than William and Mary, just as far as the diversity goes. I guess at UND there wasn't too much diversity. It was a lot of students from North Dakota and Minnesota that were predominantly white students. And the students that were more diverse were often athletes coming from out of state, coming into North Dakota specifically just to play sports, such as basketball, football, track, stuff like that. So that was the diversity within UND. And then currently at William and Mary, I would say there's about 100 students within my MBA class, my graduating class.
Oh.
I would say we have about 20 different countries represented within my cohort alone. So it's pretty diverse that way, which is very nice. I've been able to meet students from all over the world, build relationships with them, learn more about their culture and what business is like maybe in their country, and if they intend to go back to their country, what that looks like for them in the future, or if they intend to stay here, what that would look like for them.
That's awesome. So, you know what, I did a survey and I asked folks who identify, the part of the survey, like the participants needed to identify as people who are multiracial. However, their multiracialness was up to them, but that was kind of the thing. And I asked them, like, what's work like? What are the work experiences? And some people were like, I think it's perfectly fine. I have no issues. Some people said most of their issues were outside of the workplace. And then there were people who were like, it's rough. And I think a lot of it had to do with maybe how they present phenotypically, like what they look like versus how they identify, right? So for people who are multiracial or multi-ethnic and are not white presenting, the stories, that's where it starts to sort of vary a little bit. So I was just curious, have you had experiences outside of school with work at all, or?
Prior to school, I did a lot of retail type of work. And I guess it was for a smaller mom and pop type of shop. So there wasn't very many employees there. So I would say that wasn't as diverse, but it was still a really good group of people and they were all very welcoming of me. And then as far as like actual more professional types of roles, I've done a couple of different internships.
Okay.
And within the internships, my first one didn't offer that much diversity. It was a lot of white men and from military background, if that makes sense. And then my second internship role was a lot more diverse. It was for a little bit larger of a company. So they had a lot more diversity within that organization than the one that was based out of North Dakota. So there always is that difference where wherever you go to like a bigger area, there seems to be more diversity. And then also as the company gets larger, I would say.
Yeah, that makes sense, for sure. I don't know about you, Rachel or Brieanna, but for me, I find that a lot of the times, and it could be just because of how I present phenotypically, I don't know, or whatever, but a lot of my social interactions are with brown folks who either are from other countries or just who they themselves are racially ambiguous, no matter what our identities are. I think it just kind of feels a little bit safer because for me, and this could just be like me and the stuff that me and my therapist need to work through. For me, it's been a lot of like not enoughism. I don't feel enough of this or enough of that, or this constant pressure to feel like I have to prove that I'm Black or prove something or demonstrate it in some way. And we live in a time where nobody these days is like, no, you're not. But when I was growing up, they were like that. So I lived in Alaska, but there was a 6-year period, 5 or 6 years, I guess. We lived in Pittsburgh. And to me, geography matters. Brieanna, you talked about the difference between North Dakota and where you're at on the East Coast now. And from going to Pittsburgh was like, whoa, also very diverse, but not as accepting by anyone. Black folks are not. And so it was an interest. Yeah, it was really, I was like, what is actually happening? And I think I was like in 5th or 6th grade when we went there. So what those years where you're starting to enter middle school where belonging matters like so much. So
yeah, for sure. It's interesting because I think people think diversity automatically comes with inclusion.
right.
And it does not, because people bring those ideas with them about what it means to be this, that, or the other. So here I have my friend group ranges, but I find, like you said, I find comfort and safety in groups of brown folks, Black and brown folks, because I feel like when I'm with my, my white friends, I sometimes feel tokenized. I feel like I'm like, a comfortable Black friend. And then when people get close to you, they start to say things that are problematic and think because you don't present as, quote unquote, all the way Black, then they're like, oh, I can say this wild thing. And I am not the one for that. Like, I am not your palatable Black friend.
That's the
like,
word. I was thinking of that word, palatable. That comes up a lot.
I am not it. And I have no problem letting you know what time it is. And then people are shocked. They're like, ooh, I didn't know you were one of those Black people. Like, what is that? Do we need to unpack that conversation? And so I find frustration with people thinking that there is safety in the light-skinnedness that I bring to the group. And then they're shocked when I'm like, you cannot have anti-Black rhetoric around me because you don't think I am that type of Black person because of your limited scope of understanding of racial identity and presentation.
Yeah, that kind of brings me back to some different things. Like I too would kind of lean towards more hanging out with Black and brown people when I was in high school. But even sometimes then some of my Black and brown friends would make comments about me, like if I was wearing a certain outfit that day, they would tell me, oh, you're you're not dressed black today. Your outfit doesn't look like an outfit a black person would wear, or just something like that from even my black friends, which was kind of hard to hear. Like, I didn't know a black person dressed a certain way. I'm literally just wearing a shirt and like jeans or something, you know, and she would always comment on everything about me. And I was just like, okay, maybe she really isn't that good or like that supportive of a friend to me, because she would always comment about my body or things I was wearing and stuff like that. And I just thought it was interesting coming from a black woman herself. So.
Yeah, because that goes back to like, what is blackness? Why are there brands of blackness? And also, what it's perpetuating stereotypes. Whenever you say like this isn't this or this isn't that. I have a really good friend. She keeps saying we need to do a thing on what kind of black are you? Because I said something about, she was asking me about some pop culture thing. And I was like, what year was it? Because here's the thing. If I was either in Alaska or out of the country, I probably didn't see it or you know, got it late or whatever. It's there's what culture is, and culture can be totally dependent upon your geography, where you are. And look, Brieanna, when I was growing up, we didn't have the internet. You know, the trends and things traveled a lot more slowly. You got it if you had TV, if you had cable or whatever, you might catch a little something. If you had access to like MTV or something, you could see some trendy things. Otherwise, those trends traveled across the country very, very slowly. And these days, shoot, TikTok, by the time you see the one video, you send it to somebody else, they're like, I already seen it. You're like, okay, the trend is over.
Yeah.
It's over.
The elder millennial in me is so tired. Because like, you know, I am from the days when you would record things on cassette tapes. Like you turn the radio on to record on the cassette tape so that you could have your favorite songs to play.
This is two fingers because you have to hit play and record at the same time. Yeah, that's why I did that.
100%. And to kind of echo what a little bit you're saying, you know, my parents, God bless them, robbed me of a lot of cultural experiences because on top of being racialized as biracial, we were also like, my parents were very devout Christians. So I could not listen to the radio. I couldn't watch MTV. I had Mariah Carey because she looked like me.
You.
No secular music for me. Mariah Carey because she's mixed, so I could listen to her. I could listen to like Ace of Base and New Kids on the Block because they were a cute little boy band. Yes, I had a sleeping bag and everything, right? But outside of that, so all the dances that everybody knows how to do, the Roger Rabbit, I don't know how to do that. I have no context of movies and all these things that my friends do that sometimes solidify the Black experience for people, right? Those cultural anecdotes.
Those are the shared, that's the shared part.
Right, that shared identity.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it adds a nuance for me into that conversation. So I show up and I identify as a biracial Black person. And sometimes Black folks are like, friend, you're a little bright to be Black. And sometimes they're like, oh no, you know, the whole one drop rule thing, like you're one of us. And so as Brieanna was saying, it can be so jarring to say I find safety in this place, but sometimes people in that place, because of colorism and all these things that have been introduced as part of our culture by colonization, all that other stuff, that still exists. And so your experience then can be marred by that because it is meant to be an exclusionary tactic, and it worked. And we still see that. I have students, I told Shawna before that I was a teacher, and, you know, I taught primarily students from underserved backgrounds, and I still am community with some of them today. So I'll take them to like a restaurant to go eat, and they'll be like, why are you taking us all these white places? I'm like, this is just a place to eat.
What's a white place?
It's not a white establishment.
But you know what? That is true, Rachel, because whenever I was in like high school, or I guess in middle school, early high school, this is still when I was in Pittsburgh. Because we ended up going back to Anchorage, by the way. We did our few years. We were like, we go back to the Pacific Northwest. But my later middle school, early high school years, you know, when we would be hanging out. Also, fun fact, I went to a Christian school. So we came from all different parts of the county, or even different counties to go to this one, I think whatever the radius was. And so when I would want to hang out with a friend, oh, Mom, so-and-so said I could come over, and my mom would be like, are they in a white neighborhood? And one day in my recent, like within the last 3 years or so, I was walking my dogs this was around COVID time when everyone was sort of inside, but people would take walks just to kind of get out of your house, right? So I was like walking my dogs, and this is before I moved into the place I'm in right now. And I realized I was walking and I was like, I'm in a white neighborhood. It was really interesting to have that realization because to me now it's just a neighborhood. But when you know the history of segregation in residential areas and
Redlining.
and I also know that there are certain places, I don't know if you know about Sundown Towns, Brieanna, but even though there aren't official Sundown Towns, there's still some counties you don't drive through.
In Virginia.
I know.
So I can definitely understand that. Like, I've had the chance to travel to some areas that have had historically different types of plantations in them, I guess. And just seeing that type of area is a lot different than the eastern part of it. There's a lot more animosity maybe towards biracial and Black people there. I think that a lot of the times people maybe turn on each other within those neighborhoods, even if they do look similar. I feel like they're untrusting of one another, even if they are from similar backgrounds. Just growing up in an area where a lot of people are maybe out to get them is what I noticed within that area.
So that's like untrusting of each other. Wow.
That's kind of what I noticed even in those really small towns, that people are hurting each other there at really high rates. But why is that? Even if you look like your neighbor, they're still willing to hurt them, basically, which I thought that they should band together and support one another, build up their community, because a lot of their communities are also suffering, and they have lack of jobs out that way. They have maybe not a lot of access to healthy types of food, and a lot of businesses end up going into foreclosure or just closing down because they don't have the sense of community, is what I noticed.
Yeah.
They don't support each other.
Well, I mean, I guess in some cases, whenever there is economic issues in a given area, like when you talk about food deserts and things like that, you go back to the basics, and it's survival for number one. Community has to come later, sadly. But I am sad to hear that. Again, when you're in a larger sort of metropolitan area, you do tend to be around people who come from lots of places, who are not always, but more than some places, accepting. And gosh, Rachel, you said that thing, diversity does not mean that there's inclusion, right? So that's another thing to keep in mind. But then maybe once you're out of these areas, then, I guess you don't know what you'll find in a community. So.
And it's super frustrating because you have this idea of what America is supposed to be, right? And I don't like when people use the terminology melting pot, because that means it's full assimilation. I love the salad bowl, like we can all be in the bowl and we have our respective identities and so forth. And then coming from a place, like there's so many different segments that have different ideas about how we interact with each other. And I moved to Florida for a year way back when, and I had no idea that, like Sundown Towns were even a thing. And so my partner at the time and I were traveling from, I think it was like Tampa to Jacksonville or something. And one of my friends who had lived there, she said, you will be going through like some Sundown Towns. You like make sure you are in a hotel or someplace when it gets dark. And this was in like, I don't know, like not maybe like 2015, 2016, 2017 timeframe. Like in the year of our Lord 2024. Why is this still happening, right?
Right.
But then when you look at how the time frame of like civil rights and when those things actually happen, we're looking like within the past 60 years, like within people's lifetime. And so those ideas don't go away with legislation. Those ideas don't go away with, just putting more people that are ethnically diverse in a place. Those things permeate, people's lived realities and their, the way they interact with each other. And it takes generations of new ideas to supersede that. And it's frustrating because we want things like equity to be fast because like we have earned it and we deserve it, but it just is not moving as quickly as we need it to be.
Yeah. I want to pivot us back just again earlier, Brieanna, you were talking about the different ways that people sort of racialize you, even though you're like, I look in a mirror and I do not see that, But you asked a question that literally in my Start Here episode for the show that I ask listeners to at least check out that episode. I talk about the different questions, and what are you is the first question. I recently had a conversation with somebody super cool, but I was talking about what I do and where my research is and all this area of racial ambiguity and multiracial experiences. And she then asked me, do you mind telling me what your ethnic background is, whatever? And I said, no, I don't mind.
Yeah.
And I explained. But I said, the thing is, I'm so used to being asked, and it's part of the work that I do, that it's not like an offensive thing to me. Plus, I know that a lot of people they're just so curious. I wonder like how you feel about that. So you talked about the different ways people, and they use, what does that feel like to you when people ask about your background?
To me, like when I was younger, it used to be like a lot more different to me. Like that feeling when they would ask me made me sometimes more uncomfortable, just because I was just growing up and finding my own comfort in my own identity as a child, I guess. But now as an adult, I'm a lot more comfortable in my own identity, and I'm fine with people asking me as long as it's in a respectful way. You know, like I don't want them to be coming from a negative place or a place of darkness when they're asking about my background just to make fun of me or to crack a joke. You know what I mean? Because I've also gotten a lot of people not knowing I'm Black cracking racist Black jokes in front of me. And then I say, oh, I'm Black. I don't laugh. I tell them I'm Black. That's not funny to me. And then they look at me and say, oh, I thought you were Latina. That's always their response.
As if
when
that's
they
okay.
crack a joke. Yeah. That's always their response. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like even if I was, it's still not appropriate to say that to somebody, you know?
But for the most part, if they're respectful, you feel perfectly comfortable.
Yeah, I'm completely open about my background if they want to learn more about who I am as a person or where I come from. And as long as they're just doing it out of, curiosity with a good heart, then I'm totally fine with them, because most of the time they are curious to learn and they do want to know more about it because they maybe haven't had that kind of exposure, especially a lot of my international classmates as well, that they made that a comment to me that they would love to learn more about American history, American culture, and that would include both Native and African American culture.
Sure.
They did specifically bring that up to me, that they wish that the school did offer more of that kind of stuff, because coming from, a lot of them come from India, for example, and a lot of my Indian classmates have brought up that they wish that they could learn more about African American and Native American culture specifically.
Yeah. People sometimes ask, once I've had the conversation, well, how should I ask? So I'm going to pose it to you too. What can a person say, or what's the respectful way to ask if they're going to ask?
I think that when they ask, I think maybe what is your ethnic background is what they typically would ask, maybe, like, instead of what are you, because that's, again, so vague, like, oh, I'm American. That would be my response to that question.
I also think it's dehumanizing to say, what are you? But, that's me.
Oh, you're so exotic. I hate hearing that term as well. I don't like to be labeled as exotic, because really, my ancestors have been in America probably longer than a lot of their ancestors have. You know what I mean? So if anyone... if anyone's more exotic, it's probably not me. You know what I mean? So I'm just like, I don't like to be called exotic or termed as that, because it kind of reminds me of maybe an exotic animal, which I'm not. So I don't like being termed as that.
I think that was my favorite moment in the interview, and it was said so sweetly.
Sisters have been in America for a long time. You know what I mean? Like,
yes, ma'am.
I'm just as American as anybody else. So
I loved that so
very
much.
Interesting.
Oh, I'm exotic.
I'm with you.
You're the new one here. What you doing?
Period.
Yeah, it's like, unless you're maybe Native American, then aren't we all kind of exotic in our own way? Like,
say that part for the people in the back,
right?
Yeah,
that was so good.
Yeah, but I'm with Brieanna on that one. I have students, young people that'll say that because, again, there's this confusion between, like, they have an idea of what it means to present a certain way racially. And so if I don't fit into that, they'd be like, well, what are you? And so then I'll talk them through, maybe the best way to ask that is like, what is your heritage, your ethnic background? If you tell me more about your culture or something like that, because what are you is demeaning in many ways. Like you said, we're not, zoo animals, right? And in particular, as I said before, like out here in these dating streets, it is no bueno. And like men love to ask that question. They love to be like, well, what are you? You're so exotic, like Brieanna said.
Yeah.
And I am like, I am regular. And I do not appreciate you putting me on this weird pedestal that is rooted in some sort of like anti-blackness, right? Like, I
Because
am
that's what it
not.
is. That is what that
It
is.
is. It is 100% that. And then they'll think, well, I don't, I've had men say to me things like, well, I don't date, like black girls, but
I'm
like,
assuming,
you're
I
not
shouldn't
like
interrupt you,
those.
but I'm assuming you're talking about black men.
Of course,
That's what I
whom
thought.
I dearly in my spirit love so much. But that whole thing we talked about, colorism, is rooted in sort of this, and misogyny and all these other things. So it's frustrating because it's like, you are trying to put down, other black women by elevating someone that looks like me, basic on just my skin tone alone.
Right.
No, knowing nothing about me, knowing other than my skin tone. And again, I'm not the one. Like, I'm not interested in you anymore, because I'm not the one that's going to allow you codify your anti-blackness and then fetishize light-skinned women by virtue of just our skin tone. And that, folks, is how we use our privilege, if you didn't know, in ways to tell these people, no, you may not, I am not a safe space for and insert whatever raggedy term that person is being at that time.
Something else that I kind of wanted to comment on too was that you mentioned that your mother was black and your father was white. So that also is something that people often bring up to me when I do tell them that I identify as half black and half white. For some reason, the second follow-up question is always, is your father or mother black or white? And then they always say, I'm assuming your mother's white, your father's black. So did you ever get that a lot growing up, or people perceive the relationship of a white woman and a black man differently than a black woman and a white man? I've always noticed that as well growing up.
Yeah, 100%, Brieanna. People are always like, oh, so your mom's a white lady. I'm like, absolutely not. She is a black and indigenous woman. Like, we have Native Sioux in our family. So and then it's just like the deer in the headlights. Like, it's like disrupting these stereotypes of what an interracial relationship is.
I find that so interesting. You all tell me what you think about this, because I feel like it's fetish. I can't say this word.
I think I know exactly what you're going to say.
It's on TikTok. You know what I'm saying? TikTok and IG.
Yeah, I think so.
She knows where I'm going. This whole black woman syndrome, or black woman.
Yeah. Before you dated a black woman, you looked like this, or then you look like that.
There's now like a black man effect too. I've seen.
Oh, I haven't seen this.
Where the white women are like, how putting the pictures before, when they got them a black man, which, okay, go off, friend.
But what do you think about that? I think people truly underestimate the feeling that comes with seeing your situation or your identity represented. Because I feel like, we don't have to, we can be our authentic selves and be loved by anyone, and not have this fear, like, I can't be loved by this person or this person or this person just because of who I am. So I'm starting to see this change more, where there's more black women and not just white men, like all the men.
I guess that's always a question too that I always think is important to ask, is like, does representation matter? And I always think that yes, of course it does, but a lot of people don't seem to think that the representation of black people in the media or in certain things that historically they haven't been represented in, I think is important to people. And just for that reason, seeing your situation, out there and people owning it, loving it, and being their true self, I think is important for people to see. So I think that it's awesome that more and more people are able to feel comfortable and date outside of their race and not feel like they have that stigma that a lot of times came along with it maybe 40 years ago. So
40, 20, 15, 10.
Yeah.
20 minutes ago sometimes, depending on what part of Virginia you're in.
Yeah, 10 minutes ago. Yeah.
Legit.
But yeah, I think representation is a huge, important piece. And it's great to see that people are starting to finally just do it and be themselves.
Yeah.
So.
I love that perspective. So the TikTok trend that we're talking about, these white men, were presenting a certain way, and then they got with a black woman and, leveled up in many ways. And so it's cute. And again, my father is white, and we've had tons of conversation about, like, why don't you bring home white men? And yeah, I have tried it a couple of times, and I had a very jarring experience with a white man who I was dating. and we went to like a hibachi. And you know how everybody's sitting there? It's like this communal style thing, which I do not like. And the man tries to throw the shrimp in your mouth. Also don't like that. So we're sitting there and, I'm on a date. So I'm giving. I did the hair, the makeup, the dress, all the things. And we leave out of there. And this man was like, did you see that, black man looking at you? And I was like, that's what they do. Whatever. And he's like, yeah, I was so like proud because like I had one of theirs. I had one of their women.
Oh.
And I was like, friend, I need to call an Uber to get home.
Yeah.
So that is the fetishization piece, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, what in you wants to get a leg
also,
up on a
excuse
man
me, but you're not
know?
a trading card. I'd be like, I'm not a trading card. I'm not.
Am I a Pokemon now?
Right. Like, what? I had one. I was proud because I got one. What? You think I'm not a golden ticket?
No. And then there was all of the, the other stereotypical questions that come along with certain endowments of certain people in certain racial groups, male in particular. And he was like very insecure about that. And so I was like, you have a lot to unpack within yourself, number one, but then this whole racial dynamic, I am not the one to unpack that with you. And so that really kind of scarred my experience with, and it wasn't like, again, so we got Ricky back at 12. Remember that? Let's circle back. Ricky's mom came out in her bathrobe. It was like, no, thank you, Rachel. And then throughout the years, these experiences happened. And that was in like my 20s. And just recently, I was like, all right, maybe, I watched Love is Blind. Lauren and Cameron were really cute. They were like the pioneer couple. Cameron was a delightful, adorable white man, and Lauren was a gorgeous, very successful Black woman. And it was like the standard for Love is Blind. I am a reality TV junkie, friends. And then we have been trying to get to the pinnacle of that, and it just like doesn't exist. But because Cameron is a very aware type of white man and very aware of his privilege and identity, and he does not seem to fetishize his wife. He seems to love her for who she is, and I think sometimes it's difficult for some white folks to truly embody that because of how we have been indoctrinated with racism and racialization in our country. And dating men, period, in right now is a lot. So adding that layer to it, I am tired. Brieanna, you are very young and you have a lot of time and a lot of patience. I, in my middle age, do not. So as many barriers I can take away from just tolerating a menfolk, I'm at a point now where I don't know if that's going to be my ministry, to be honest.
My ministry. Oh, you cracked me up. Wow. So this has been a good conversation. Brieanna, is there anything that you just want folks to know, either about you or your experience before we close?
I guess I'm happy with who I am, and I'm comfortable with my identity. Growing up, I wasn't as comfortable with it. I used to get bullied a lot because of how I looked different to other students, so that really was hard for me growing up. But currently, I love my curly hair. I just have it straight right now because I just got it cut, but usually I always represent the curly hair because growing up, I used to straighten it every single day in high school because people used to bully me for it. But I finally learned to love the curls and embrace it. So for me, I'm happy with who I am now. So
I love that. Yeah, I love that. Oh, well, thank you so much for spending this time with us and sharing your thoughts and your experiences. I'm glad that we could have you on. I think every single one of these conversations reaches somebody. Somebody can relate to them. So thanks for contributing.
Yeah, no problem. It was nice meeting both of you, or Shawna again, and it was nice to meet you for the first time as well, Rachel, and getting to know more about your background and Shawna's background. I learned a lot of stuff that I had no idea about both of you guys. So,
well, listen, I just want to give a quick little shout out for Brieanna because you're finishing up your MBA. You're going to be ready to share your talents with somebody out there. Yes.
I'm looking into going into marketing. I like a lot of product management and social media, so I'm always open to connections.
If y'all need an amazing marketer, social media manager, you should contact Brieanna. So thank you. This was so great.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
I appreciate it.
Absolutely.